My father gave the family business to my brother and kicked me out. Richard gathered us in his lavish office, walls covered with framed photos of Carter Construction skyscrapers. One showed my first project, but the nameplate credited Nathan. That should have been my first clue today wasn't going to end well for me. Carter Construction had been my entire life. While other kids played video games, I sketched building designs and learned structural engineering. I wasn't just passionate, I was good at it, really good. I graduated top of my class from MIT with innovative ideas about sustainable construction. For 3 years, I'd been developing an integrated system for energy-efficient buildings. It could cut costs by 30% while reducing environmental impact. The technology wasn't just green, it made financial sense, too. At least, that's what I thought until today's investor meeting. I prepared for weeks, the presentation was polished, the numbers solid. As I walked through projections, I saw genuine interest from potential investors. Then Nathan, my older brother and Dad's golden boy, cleared his throat. While Ethan's ideas are creative, he said with a condescending smile, they're ultimately too risky and not profitable enough for Carter Construction's portfolio. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nathan presented an alternative, a luxury condo development using traditional methods. No innovation, no sustainability, just the same old blueprint we'd followed for decades. I looked to Dad, waiting for him to back me up. After all, he'd always encouraged innovation in private conversations. But Dad nodded along with Nathan, his face showing approval. Nathan's approach is time-tested, Dad told the investors. We know the margins, we know the timeline, it's the Carter Construction way. The Carter Construction way. The phrase echoed in my head as the investors nodded thoughtfully. 3 years of my research and development dismissed in 5 minutes. After the meeting, I cornered Dad in his office. You didn't even give my ideas a chance, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan, this isn't college, he replied, not looking up from his desk. This is business, real business. Nathan understands. Nathan understands outdated thinking that's killing this planet, I shot back. Dad finally looked up, his expression hardening. That attitude is exactly why today's announcement will probably disappoint you. I knew what he meant. Today was the big succession ceremony, where Dad would announce how ownership of Carter Construction would transfer to the next generation. The entire company would be there. Hours later, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Marriott downtown, nursing a sparkling water, trying to look optimistic. Employees and business partners mingled around, everyone waiting for Dad's big announcement. Mom, Diane, kept shooting me sympathetic glances from across the room, which only made me more nervous. When Dad took the stage, the room fell silent. He gave his usual speech about building the company from nothing, about his vision and perseverance. Then came the moment of truth. Carter Construction has always been about family, but also about making smart business decisions, he said, glancing between Nathan and me. After careful consideration, I've decided on the following ownership structure. Nathan will receive 55% of the company's shares and the position of CEO. The room burst into applause while I stood frozen, my glass halfway to my lips. More than half the company. I knew Nathan would get more, but this gave him complete control. I'll retain 30% ownership and continue as chairman of the board, Dad continued after the applause died down. The remaining 15% will stay with our current minority shareholders. I noticed he hadn't mentioned me at all, not even a token share. The 10% I owned were shares I purchased myself years ago, when the company was struggling and needed capital. I'd invested every penny of my savings because I believed in what we were building. Now, after all my years of education and innovation, I wasn't deemed worthy of a single additional share. The room was spinning slightly, and I set my untouched drink on a nearby table. Dad found me later as I stood alone by the refreshment table. Your green ideas won't bring profits in the real world, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Be grateful for what you've got. Grateful? For being publicly humiliated and having my life's work dismissed? The evening dragged on, with executives congratulating Nathan and giving me awkward pats on the back. I needed air and headed to the hotel's garden terrace, finding a quiet corner behind some ornamental shrubs. That's when I heard Nathan's voice from the other side of the greenery. He was talking to Stephen Grant, one of our biggest investors. The East Side development? Yeah, that's happening immediately, Nathan was saying. We're converting all of it into a shopping complex, breaking ground next month. My blood froze. The East Side development was my pet project, 15 acres I'd planned to transform into a mixed-use eco-community with a public park at its center. Dad had promised I could lead that project, regardless of the succession outcome. What about the environmental concerns? Stephen asked. Wasn't there some issue with protected wetlands? Nathan laughed. Nothing that can't be handled with the right permits and the right donations to the right campaigns. The profit margins on this will be insane once we maximize the retail space. I stepped back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about pushing me aside anymore. Nathan was planning to bulldoze everything I'd worked for and replace it with another soulless shopping mall. And he was willing to skirt environmental regulations to do it. As I listened to them discuss how they'd handle the environmental impact studies, something shifted inside me. The hurt and disappointment crystallized into something harder, sharper. I'd spent my life playing by the rules, trusting the system, believing good ideas would win out. Maybe it was time to try something different. I slipped away before they could notice me, already formulating a plan. Dad and Nathan thought my ideas weren't profitable in the real world. Fine. I'd show them exactly what my innovations could do, and what the company was losing by pushing me aside. The week after the succession announcement felt like walking through quicksand. Each day at the office became more uncomfortable as colleagues gave me pitying glances in hallways. I kept my head down, avoided Nathan and Dad, and focused on leveraging my 10% ownership stake. That's when Mom called with news that changed everything. "Uncle Tom is gone," she said. "Found alone in his remote desert home, passed away in his sleep." I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, a realization that hit me with unexpected guilt. 3 days later, I stood among a small gathering of mourners in a modest funeral home in Alpine, Texas. Just immediate family and a handful of former colleagues from his mining days made the effort to attend. As the minister spoke words that barely captured who Uncle Tom really was, my mind drifted back to when I was 12. Uncle Tom had been the only one who didn't laugh at my rock collection. While Dad dismissed it as playing with dirt, Uncle Tom presented me with my first geological hammer, eyes twinkling. "There's a future in these rocks, Ethan," he told me. "Everyone else just sees a pile of worthless stones." Dad stood stiffly in his dark suit, checking his watch and smartphone when he thought no one was looking. Nathan hadn't even bothered to show up, claiming an unmovable investor meeting took priority over family. Uncle Tom Carter had always been the family oddball, Dad's younger brother who chose studying Earth over building on top of it. A brilliant geologist at BHP Billiton until management fired him 8 years ago. Family whispers painted him as stubborn and impractical, insisting on exploring what the company labeled a worthless claim despite orders to abandon it. After his termination, he liquidated his retirement funds and disappeared to a remote property in the desert. The family effectively wrote him off as a failure, someone who couldn't function in the real world. At holiday dinners, Mom would mention him with that tone reserved for relatives who made embarrassing life choices. But to 12-year-old me, Uncle Tom showed a different world. The summer before 7th grade, I spent 2 weeks with him in his desert home while Dad was busy expanding his real estate empire. Uncle Tom introduced me to the ancient history beneath our feet. We'd wake before sunrise to hike through canyons, Uncle Tom pointing out different formations. He explained how each layer represented millions of years of Earth's story. "See this line right here," he'd say, running his weathered hand across striped sedimentary rock. "That's not just dirt, that's a chapter in history. You just need to learn how to read it." One scorching afternoon, we ventured deeper into his property than ever before. The landscape appeared harsh and unwelcoming, rust-colored earth and sparse vegetation that somehow thrived despite impossible conditions. "People look at land like this and see nothing valuable," Uncle Tom told me as we climbed a steep ridge. "Empty wasteland. That's because they're looking with the wrong eyes." When we reached the summit, he pulled out water bottles from his backpack and handed one to me. "The future isn't in fancy buildings, Ethan. It's in understanding what lies beneath our feet, the elements that will power what comes next." I didn't fully grasp his meaning then. I was just a kid fascinated by dinosaur fossils and sparkly minerals. Yet something about his conviction stayed with me, influencing my interest in sustainable building materials and green technology. After the service, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses approached our family. "Mr. Hayes," he introduced himself with a solemn nod, "your brother's attorney. If the family could meet at my office tomorrow morning, there are matters regarding Tom's estate that require attention." Dad barely concealed his dismissive attitude. "Can't be much to divide," he muttered under his breath, but agreed to the meeting. The next morning, our remaining family, Dad, Mom, my sister Lauren, and myself, gathered in Mr. Hayes's modest office. The small room quickly filled with the scent of Dad's expensive cologne, mixing unpleasantly with the musty odor of old legal books. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat and began reading the will. The house and its contents went to Lauren, who seemed genuinely surprised but pleased. She had always admired Uncle Tom's independent spirit, even without sharing his geological passions. A small savings account was divided among local conservation organizations. Then Mr. Hayes turned to me. "To my nephew, Ethan Carter, who alone saw value where others saw nothing, I leave my 50 acres of land in Brewster County, all mineral rights included, along with my research materials and geological equipment. May you discover what I always knew was there." The room fell silent. Dad shifted impatiently. 50 acres of empty desert, he remarked with a dismissive wave. Wonderful inheritance. But I couldn't speak. Memories flooded back, that ridge, those conversations about hidden potential, the future concealed in ordinary rock. This wasn't a random bequest, Uncle Tom had chosen me because of the connection we'd formed. "There's one more item," Mr. Hayes added, pulling a sealed envelope from a file. "Tom left this letter for Ethan, to be opened privately." The drive back to what was now Lauren's property was tense. Dad spent most of it on conference calls, barking instructions about cost overruns on a development in Phoenix. Apparently, Nathan's first major project as CEO was already running into trouble, $3 million over budget. "This Arizona project is becoming a complete disaster," Dad growled after hanging up. Mom patted his arm reassuringly. "I'm sure Nathan will work it out, dear, he just needs more time." I gazed out the window at the passing landscape, feeling the weight of Uncle Tom's letter in my pocket. The desert looked different now, part of it belonged to me. When we arrived, Lauren began inventorying her inheritance while Mom complained about the dust. Dad announced he needed to return to the city by morning. The company crisis demanded his attention. "You should sell that land, Ethan," he suggested as we brought in luggage. "The company's facing serious cash flow issues with this Phoenix situation. Could use the liquidity. And though that property isn't worth much, every bit helps right now." "I just inherited it today, Dad," I replied. "Maybe I should at least see what I actually own first." He shrugged indifferently. "Suit yourself, but the company's in a tight spot. Nathan could use some family support." The irony of him asking me to bail out Nathan after being overlooked at the succession ceremony was almost laughable. That night, after everyone retired to bed, I opened Uncle Tom's letter. Inside was a single page of his distinctive handwriting and a small key. "Ethan," it read, "if you're reading this, I ran out of time. The answers are in my workshop, in the lockbox under the geological survey maps. The corporation was wrong, I was right. There's a fortune under those rocks, but not the kind they were looking for. Check my journals, especially the entries from 2015. Look for the formation I called the Dragon's Back. And whatever you do, don't sell the land, not before you understand what you have, what we have. It's not just rocks, Ethan, it's the future." I slipped quietly to Uncle Tom's workshop behind the main house. The simple structure served as half storage shed, half laboratory. A fine layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed since his passing. His geological equipment remained meticulously organized on shelves, specialized hammers, sieves, magnifiers, and testing kits. Against one wall stood filing cabinets labeled by region and year. The survey maps covered a large table in the center. Lifting them carefully, I found the lockbox, small, fireproof metal. The key fit perfectly. Inside were several notebooks, Uncle Tom's field journals, and a USB drive. What immediately caught my attention were rock samples, carefully labeled and arranged in section containers. Each bore coordinates I assumed corresponded to locations on my newly inherited land. I grabbed a journal marked 2015 and began reading. Uncle Tom's excitement jumped off the pages, his handwriting growing increasingly urgent. "Confirmed today what I suspected," one entry read. "The concentration is among the highest recorded. They're all looking for oil and gas, fools. The real value isn't in fossil fuels, it's in what's needed for the next energy revolution." The final entry, dated 3 weeks before his death, sent chills down my spine. "Received the final assay results, even better than expected. If my calculations are correct, this deposit could be worth billions in the coming market. Have to be careful now, others would kill for this information." Beneath the journals was a folder containing detailed geological surveys, chemical analyses, and market projections. At the bottom lay a map with an X marking an area labeled Dragon's Back and the words Main Deposit underlined 3 times. I stayed awake all night studying Uncle Tom's research, the pieces gradually connecting. By dawn, I understood why he'd been so adamant about that worthless claim. Why he'd spent his life savings buying those 50 acres. And why he'd left it all to me. Uncle Tom hadn't been a failure who couldn't follow rules. He'd been a visionary who recognized value everyone else missed. And now that vision was mine to carry forward, if I was brave enough to follow the path he'd mapped. As the sun rose over the desert, I made my decision. I wouldn't be selling those 50 acres to rescue Nathan's failing project. Not now, not ever. I returned to Dallas with a new sense of purpose. While Dad and Nathan flew back immediately to handle the Phoenix project disaster, I took the scenic route. My head was filled with Uncle Tom's discoveries. The USB drive contained years of research, geological surveys, chemical analyses, and market projections. They confirmed what his journal suggested: the land contained a significant deposit of rare earth minerals, essential for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles and renewable energy technology. The quarterly shareholder meeting was scheduled for the following week. As a 10% stakeholder, I had every right to attend, though in the past I'd been there as Dad's son and company engineer, not as an independent shareholder challenging leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. The corporate headquarters lobby felt different this time. Security guards who normally greeted me with friendly nods now checked my ID carefully. The receptionist who used to bring me coffee without asking called up to confirm my appointment. Word travels fast when you're on the outs with the family that signs the paychecks. Dad and Nathan were already in the boardroom when I arrived. The tension was palpable as shareholders and board members filtered in, sensing the family drama. 10 minutes into Nathan's presentation about exciting new directions for Carter Construction, Dad interrupted. He announced he needed to address a concerning situation. "Before we continue," he said, looking directly at me, "my son Ethan has been offered a fair price for an inherited property important to our Phoenix development. Despite the company's current financial challenges, he's refused to sell, prioritizing his personal interests over the success of Carter Construction." The room went silent. This was a calculated move, Dad making my private inheritance a public matter. "The land in question is worthless desert scrub that my brother inexplicably left to Ethan," Dad continued. "We've offered market value, but apparently family loyalty means nothing compared to some sentimental attachment to dust and rocks." I stood up, determined to maintain my composure. "The land was left to me personally, not Carter Construction. It's not part of company assets and never was. And contrary to what's been suggested, I've conducted preliminary surveys indicating the property has significant value, just not for shopping malls." Dad's face reddened. "Are you following Tom's foolish obsession now? He was fired for chasing mineral fantasies instead of doing his actual job." "Maybe the company that fired him should have listened," I replied, clutching a folder containing Uncle Tom's most conclusive test results. "I brought copies of geological surveys that—" Nathan cut me off. "This isn't a science fair, Ethan, it's business. Either you're with this company or you're against it." I looked around the room at the uncomfortable faces of board members and shareholders. These people had known me my entire life, some had watched me grow up. None would meet my eyes now. "I think we need to clarify your position with the company," Dad said coldly. "Given your unwillingness to support our current direction, I suggest a leave of absence until you reconsider your priorities." It wasn't a suggestion. By the end of the day, my keycard stopped working. HR sent an email about transitioning company assets, including the downtown apartment that had been my home for 5 years. My company credit cards were deactivated while I was trying to buy lunch. The swift, calculated nature of it showed this had been planned well before the meeting. That evening, Lauren called. "They can't just throw you out," she said, her voice a mix of anger and concern. "Technically, they can," I replied, packing what I could into my SUV. "The apartment's a company asset, Dad's name is on the lease, not mine." "Stay with me," she offered, "at least until you figure things out." I appreciated the offer, but my sister's place was a small one-bedroom in the Arts District. Besides, I already knew what I needed to do next. "Thanks, but I've made a decision. I'm going to develop Uncle Tom's land myself." Her silence spoke volumes. "You think I'm crazy, too," I said. "No," she finally answered, "I think you're braver than I'd be. But Ethan, they won't stop at taking your apartment. Nathan's already talking to people, construction firms, engineering outfits. They're all getting the message that hiring Ethan Carter would be a bad business move." She wasn't wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 promising job interviews mysteriously ended with, "We decided to go in another direction." Former colleagues stopped returning my calls. My professional network, built over years in the Dallas construction scene, suddenly developed collective amnesia about my existence. With my savings dwindling and no job prospects, I made a decision. I sold my furniture, put the rest in storage, and purchased a used trailer with what remained. If I couldn't work in construction in Dallas, I'd build something of my own on Uncle Tom's land, my land. The drive to West Texas was long and lonely. The farther I got from Dallas, the more the landscape changed, buildings and highways giving way to vast open spaces. By the time I reached Brewster County, it felt like I'd entered another world. The nearest town was Alpine, a small community that seemed frozen in time compared to Dallas's evolving skyline. Getting the trailer onto my property was harder than expected. The dirt access road hadn't been maintained in years, and recent rains had created ruts deep enough to swallow a tire. After nearly getting stuck twice, I positioned the trailer on a flat area near where Uncle Tom had marked potential water sources in his notes. That first night was a harsh reality check. The September desert dropped to near freezing once the sun set. The trailer's heating system produced more noise than warmth. The generator sputtered and died around midnight, plunging me into darkness. I spent the night huddled under every blanket I owned, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Morning came with unexpected noise. Someone was outside. I stumbled out to find an older man with weathered skin and a military straight posture examining my pathetic setup. Generators flooded, he announced without introduction. And you parked in a washout zone. First good rain, you'll be floating halfway to Mexico. Who are you? I asked, still half asleep. Ben Thompson, got property next over, he gestured vaguely eastward. Tom's sister called, said his nephew might be fool enough to try living out here without knowing what he's doing. Looks like she was right. Over the next few hours, Ben helped me move the trailer to higher ground and got the generator running properly. As we worked, he shared that he'd been a combat engineer in Vietnam, then worked oil rigs across Texas before retiring to get away from people's nonsense. He'd been neighbors with Uncle Tom for almost a decade. That night, a fierce windstorm hit the area. My trailer shook so violently I thought it might roll over. Ben, who'd stayed to ensure everything was secured, just laughed at my wide-eyed panic. "City boy, you haven't seen a real storm yet," he said, sipping coffee as the wind howled outside. "This is just the desert saying hello." The next 2 weeks became my crash course in desert survival, with Ben as my reluctant instructor. He showed me how to anchor the trailer, set up rain catchment systems, and identify useful local plants. We established a rudimentary solar setup, supplemented by the generator for cloudy days. Each lesson came with gruff commentary about soft city folk and how Uncle Tom had at least bothered to learn before settling in. Then came the dust storm. The sky turned an eerie orange-brown as visibility dropped to nothing. Ben had warned me about securing everything, but I hadn't taken it seriously enough. When the storm hit full force, I was scrambling to tie down equipment. Through the swirling dust, I noticed a roof panel flying off a small house about a quarter-mile away. Without thinking, I grabbed tools and made my way toward it, using my truck as a windbreak. The home belonged to Margaret Wilson, a retired schoolteacher who taught in Alpine for 40 years. Together, we secured a tarp over the damaged section before the storm caused more destruction. "Tom's nephew, aren't you?" she asked afterward, serving me tea in a kitchen filled with photographs of generations of students. "He always said you were the sharp one." The following Sunday, Margaret insisted I accompany her to the small community church in town. After the service, the pastor introduced me to the congregation as Tom Carter's nephew who's taking up his place. People who'd eyed me suspiciously in the hardware store days earlier now offered handshakes and dinner invitations. It seemed Uncle Tom had been more respected in this community than in our own family. With Ben's help and equipment, I decided to address my most pressing problem: water. Uncle Tom's notes indicated several potential well sites, with one marked as most promising near the area he called Dragon's Back, a ridge resembling a sleeping dragon when viewed from the right angle. The drilling was tedious work. Ben operated the small rig he brought over while I monitored the soil and rock samples. 3 days of effort yielded nothing but frustration and increasing depth. "Maybe Tom's notes were off," Ben suggested as we approached the 150-foot mark. "Wouldn't be the first time someone misjudged where water hides around here." I was about to agree when the drill bit suddenly jerked and slowed. "Hit something," Ben announced, reversing the drill slightly. When we pulled it up, the bit was coated with fragments of unusual dark rock, streaked with colorful veins, blue, purple, and green, running through the black matrix. "That's not normal for this region," Ben said, examining the fragments with unexpected interest. "Usually get sandstone and limestone, this looks almost like." He didn't finish the sentence, just kept turning the pieces in his hand. The next morning, 3 pickup trucks I didn't recognize drove slowly past my property. That afternoon, a man in an expensive-looking SUV with Arizona plates stopped by, claiming he was checking out the area for hunting opportunities, despite it being nowhere near hunting season. He asked surprisingly specific questions about how much land I owned and whether I'd consider selling. By week's end, I received 2 unsolicited offers for my worthless desert property. One from a Phoenix development company I'd never heard of, and another from a mineral speculation outfit based in Nevada. Both offered amounts that would have seemed generous a month ago but were insultingly low compared to what Uncle Tom's research suggested the land might be worth. The timing seemed far too coincidental. When I mentioned it to Margaret during a visit to fix her porch step, she let something slip. "Oh, Ben was showing those interesting rocks you found at the general store yesterday," she said. Quite a crowd gathered to look at them. He was proud to have helped you find something unusual. So that explained it. Ben had inadvertently spread the word about our discovery. I didn't blame him, he couldn't have known the potential value, but it meant my secret was out, at least locally. And in small towns, secrets travel fast and far. Something had changed, someone had noticed what we'd pulled from that test well. Word was spreading faster than a desert wildfire. I carefully placed the strange rock samples in Uncle Tom's old safe that night, along with his research materials. Whatever we'd found, it was clear I wasn't the only one interested anymore. The increased attention to my property meant I needed answers fast. What exactly had we found in that well? Uncle Tom's journals mentioned rare earth elements, but I needed current expert analysis to be sure. Ben suggested I talk to Margaret's daughter, Rachel, who was back in town. Rachel's got some fancy geology degree from back east, he explained while helping me reinforce my trailer's foundation. Smart as they come, been working for some big mining outfit until her mom took that fall last spring. The next day, I drove to Margaret's house with my samples carefully packed in a tackle box. The woman who answered the door looked nothing like what I'd expected. Rachel Wilson was around my age, with practical short hair and the confident stance of someone used to working in the field. She listened carefully as I explained my situation, examining the rock samples with naked curiosity. "I can run some basic tests here," she said, gesturing to what had once been a dining room but now housed an impressive collection of scientific equipment. "But for anything definitive, we'll need a specialized lab." Rachel's makeshift lab was a testament to her dedication, despite being stuck in small-town Texas caring for her mother. She'd cobbled together equipment that would have impressed my MIT professors. Over the next few days, Rachel ran preliminary tests on the samples. We spent hours discussing Uncle Tom's research and comparing it with her findings. Her expertise in geology complemented my engineering background perfectly. For the first time since leaving Dallas, I felt energized, purposeful, like I was building something meaningful instead of just surviving. A week later, Rachel called and asked me to come over immediately. She had that tone people get when trying to contain excitement. When I arrived, she was hunched over a microscope, her dining room turned lab covered in papers, testing materials, and rock samples. Rachel placed one of my samples under the microscope and stepped aside for me to look. I saw colorful crystalline structures, beautiful but meaningless to my untrained eye. She explained what I was seeing, her words coming faster as her excitement grew. According to her analysis, the samples contained significant deposits of neodymium, dysprosium, and other rare earth elements. Crucial for manufacturing everything from smartphones to electric vehicles and wind turbines. What made her particularly excited was the quality and concentration. Rachel placed another sample under the microscope and gestured for me to look again. "This neodymium is the same quality as what they import from China at ridiculous prices," she explained, barely containing her enthusiasm. "What your uncle found here, it's like discovering oil in the 1920s. Her words hung in the air between us. If she was right, and her credentials suggested she was, Uncle Tom hadn't been chasing fantasies. He discovered a domestic source of materials that currently came almost exclusively from foreign suppliers, often at the mercy of international politics. "We need to confirm this with more specialized equipment," Rachel cautioned, though her excitement remained evident. "I've contacted my old lab, who might help discreetly." 2 weeks later, the comprehensive lab results confirmed Rachel's initial findings. My inheritance wasn't just valuable, it was potentially transformative, both for me and possibly for domestic technology manufacturing. The land contained one of the largest deposits of high-grade rare earth elements ever discovered in North America. The day after we received confirmation, a sleek black SUV pulled up to my trailer. A man in an expensive suit, looking out of place in the desert heat, introduced himself as Thomas Bradley from Western Resources, a mining corporation with operations throughout the Southwest. "We've heard there might be some interesting mineral formations on this property," he said smoothly, handing me a business card embossed with gold lettering. "Our company would like to make you a generous offer." The generous offer was $2.3 million, about 40 times what the land would be worth for conventional development or ranching. To someone living in a trailer and stretching every dollar, it was life-changing money. It was also, according to Rachel, laughably inadequate given what we now knew. "They're lowballing you by a factor of at least 20, she said when I showed her the offer letter. "They know exactly what's here, someone tipped them off." The pointed look she gave me suggested she suspected Ben's loose talk at the general store had reached more important ears than local gossip. Western Resources called every day for a week, gradually increasing their offer to $3.5 million. Each time, Thomas emphasized they had the expertise and equipment to develop the land properly, unlike a lone individual with limited resources. He wasn't wrong about the resources part. Developing a mining operation would require millions in startup capital, specialized equipment, permits, and skilled personnel. Money I definitely didn't have. We should partner up, Rachel suggested one evening as we pored over geological maps spread across my tiny trailer table. Form our own company, keep control of the operation rather than selling out. With what money? I asked, gesturing at my humble living situation. Banks aren't exactly lining up to loan millions to an unemployed engineer living in a trailer. Rachel's solution was brilliant. Her doctoral advisor at MIT, Professor David Chen, had connections throughout the tech industry, including venture capitalists in Silicon Valley who invested in resource development for technology manufacturing. If we could get a meeting, we might find investors interested in a domestic rare earth element source. Professor Chen came through with an invitation to present at a technology resources conference in Austin the following month. We spent weeks preparing, combining Rachel's geological expertise with my engineering background for a compelling presentation on an American source of critical materials. The conference was intimidating, a sea of industry experts, tech investors, and established resource companies with decades of experience and billions in assets. Rachel and I, in our carefully selected but non-designer business attire, stood out as amateurs. Yet our presentation generated more interest than we dared hope. Our angle was uniquely appealing in the current economic and political climate. Domestic rare earth elements meant reduced dependence on foreign suppliers, more stable supply chains, and fewer international complications. Several investors approached us afterward, and by evening's end, we had 3 serious inquiries about potential partnerships. The most promising came from Greentech Ventures, a specializing in environmentally responsible resource development. Their offer, $110 million in startup funding for a 30% stake in our company, was generous and structured to leave us with control. More importantly, they had the industry connections and regulatory experience we needed. 2 days after returning from Austin, finalizing details with Greentech's lawyers, I received an unexpected visitor. It wasn't Western Resources this time, but a familiar face, Megan Brooks, Nathan's executive assistant. "Your brother would like to meet," she said, looking uncomfortable delivering the message. Neutral ground, just a talk. I agreed to meet Nathan at a restaurant in Alpine, curious about this sudden desire for reconciliation. The Nathan who walked in was a shadow of his former confident self. The Phoenix project disaster had escalated, with cost overruns now exceeding $15 million, threatening Carter Construction's financial stability. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot with this land thing," he said, uncharacteristically humble. "Dad's old school, you know how he gets, but we're still family." The conversation meandered through careful small talk until Nathan reached his point. Carter Construction needed capital fast, banks were restricting their credit lines due to the Phoenix situation, and they had major payments coming due. "I heard you might have found something valuable out here," he admitted, "and that you're working with some investment group now." I was about to respond when a familiar face caught my eye. Thomas Bradley from Western Resources was sitting at the bar, pretending not to watch our table. The pieces clicked into place. "Interesting timing, Nathan," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building inside. "You show up right when I'm finalizing a deal with investors, and coincidentally, your new friend from Western Resources is at the same restaurant." Nathan's expression shifted from fake sincerity to cold calculation in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. You're not here for reconciliation, you're here to gather intelligence for your new partners, trying to undercut my deal or pressure me into selling to them." I stood up, tossing my napkin on the table. "Tell Bradley over there that my answer is still no. And as for family helping family, you should have thought about that before you and Dad pushed me out." I walked out, feeling Nathan's glare on my back. The casual family meeting had been a reconnaissance mission, and I'd nearly fallen for it. When I got back to my trailer, I called Rachel and asked her to dig into Western Resources' recent activities. The next morning, she arrived with printouts of news stories and financial filings. Western Resources had established a strategic partnership with several construction companies facing financial difficulties, offering cash infusions in exchange for help securing mineral rights in promising areas. One of their new partners, mentioned only in passing in an industry newsletter, was Carter Construction. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Nathan hadn't come for reconciliation. He'd partnered with Western Resources, offering to help them secure my land in exchange for financial support for the failing family company. My own brother was trying to undercut my negotiating position and help a corporate giant snatch my inheritance for a fraction of its worth. As I stared at the evidence spread across my trailer table, I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about family betrayal, corporate greed, and the future of what could become a strategically important American resource. Whatever happened next, I couldn't let Nathan and Western Resources win this battle. Too much was at stake, not just for me, but potentially for the entire domestic technology manufacturing sector. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of activity. With Green Tech Ventures backing, Rachel and I incorporated as Revival Resources. We secured the necessary permits and began preliminary development of our site. We hired the best environmental consultants to ensure our operation would have minimal impact on the desert ecosystem. Uncle Tom would have wanted it that way. Rachel developed an innovative processing method that significantly reduced the toxic byproducts typically associated with rare earth element extraction. My engineering background proved useful in designing efficient infrastructure for the remote location. We complemented each other perfectly, her geological expertise matching my practical building knowledge. Western Resources and Carter Construction didn't give up easily. They challenged our permits, spread rumors about environmental dangers to the local community, and tried to pressure GreenTech to withdraw their support. Their tactics only strengthened our resolve and brought the Alpine community closer to our side. When the county commissioners held a public hearing about our operation, over 200 locals showed up, wearing homemade Revival Resources t-shirts that Margaret and her church group had created. Ben became our unofficial security director, recruiting his retired veteran buddies to keep an eye on the property during development, just in case someone gets any funny ideas about equipment accidents, he explained with a knowing look. His team of gray-haired former military men patrolling in pickup trucks became a familiar sight. Our first test extraction exceeded all expectations. The concentration and quality of the rare earth elements were even better than our initial samples had indicated. Tech manufacturers, eager for a stable domestic supply chain, began signing preliminary agreements before we even completed our processing facility. As our company grew, Rachel and I grew closer. What began as a professional partnership evolved into something deeper. One evening, after receiving particularly promising assay results, we celebrated with dinner on the ridge we'd come to call Dragon's Back, under a spectacular desert sunset. Surrounded by the land that changed both our lives, I asked her to marry me. Her yes echoed across the valley. We married in the small Alpine church 6 months later. The entire town turned out for the celebration. By then, we'd hired 37 local residents and were developing training programs for specialized positions. Our company was becoming integral to the community's future. Instead of building a typical corporate headquarters, we invested in the town itself. Revival Resources funded a new fire station, technology upgrades for the local school, and established a scholarship program for Alpine High graduates interested in geology or engineering. We wanted success that extended beyond our balance sheet. Meanwhile, Carter Construction's troubles continued to mount. The Phoenix development became a legal nightmare as structural issues emerged in the hastily completed first phase. Multiple lawsuits followed, and their insurance refused to cover the damages, citing negligence. News outlets that once celebrated the company's success now ran stories about cutting corners and prioritizing profit over safety. I followed these developments from a distance, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. The company my grandfather had founded was collapsing under the weight of poor decisions and mismanagement. Through industry connections, I heard Western Resources had withdrawn their support after the first round of lawsuits, leaving Carter Construction without their financial lifeline. Nathan's gamble had backfired spectacularly. 3 years after that first windstorm nearly blew away my trailer, I stood on that same spot, now transformed. Where my humble home once stood, we were completing the final phase of our innovative rare earth processing center. The facility combined cutting-edge technology with sustainable practices, setting new standards for the industry. Revival Resources had grown to over 100 employees and was supplying critical materials to technology manufacturers across the country. That morning, I received an unexpected email from my mother. Dad had suffered a mild heart attack following Carter Construction's bankruptcy filing. He was stable, but the experience had changed him. She asked if I'd consider meeting with him and Nathan. They wanted to talk. My first instinct was to ignore the request. These were the people who'd pushed me out, attempted to undermine my business, and never reached out during my struggle or success. But something made me hesitate before hitting delete. That evening, I thumbed through Uncle Tom's journals again. A particular entry caught my attention, one I hadn't focused on before, dated weeks before his death. Spent a day surveying the eastern edge of Dragon's Back, it read. The readings confirm what I suspected for years. But I'm starting to understand that the true value of this land isn't what's beneath it, but how it tests a person's character. Only by facing adversity do we learn the worth of genuine relationships and the emptiness of mere ambition. Those words resonated differently now that I'd experienced both sides of fortune. I decided to agree to the meeting. We met at a neutral location, a restaurant in Midland, halfway between Dallas and Alpine. Dad looked older, diminished somehow. The confident businessman who'd intimidated boardrooms was gone, replaced by a man whose face showed every year of his life. Nathan appeared equally transformed, the designer suits and arrogant posture abandoned for modest attire and demeanor. Instead of the confrontation I'd expected, the meeting became a reckoning of sorts. Dad admitted he'd been wrong about my green ideas and Uncle Tom's worthless land. The bankruptcy had forced him to re-evaluate everything he thought he knew about business and family. Nathan, stripped of his executive title and comfortable lifestyle, acknowledged he'd never actually earned his position, it had been handed to him, along with values that ultimately failed. They were there to ask for jobs, not executive positions or ownership stakes, but working roles where they could contribute based on genuine ability. Dad believed his experience in construction could help with our expanding infrastructure needs. Nathan, humbled by failure, was willing to start wherever needed and work his way up legitimately. I thought about declining, about the satisfaction of watching them walk away empty-handed as I once had. But Uncle Tom's words about the true test of character kept returning to me. I'll need to discuss this with Rachel and our board, I told them. We make decisions as a team now. The next week, after thorough discussion, we offered Dad a position as a construction consultant for our expanding processing facility. Nathan received an entry-level position in our community relations department, a role requiring him to rebuild trust with people rather than exploit them. Over the following months, something unexpected happened. Dad's practical experience proved genuinely valuable as we scaled our operations. Free from the pressure of being the ultimate decision-maker, he enjoyed focusing purely on building things properly. He took pride in quality rather than just profit margins. Nathan struggled initially, unaccustomed to earning respect rather than demanding it. But gradually, he developed authentic relationships with community members and discovered talents he'd never known he had. His first successful initiative, a training program for local high school students interested in technology manufacturing, showed a side of him I'd never seen before. On the third anniversary of Revival Resources' founding, we broke ground on the Tom Carter Education Center, a facility dedicated to training specialists in sustainable resource extraction and processing. During the ceremony, I watched my father proudly showing his grandson, Rachel, and my 6-month-old son, the architectural models of the buildings he'd helped design. Later that evening, Rachel found me staring at a framed photo of Uncle Tom that hung in our headquarters lobby. "I have something to show you," she said, leading me to her office. She pulled up geological surveys completed the previous week. "We've been mapping the deeper mineral deposits, and Ethan, the formation extends much further than we initially thought. It could be the largest deposit in North America." I studied the maps, thinking about how Uncle Tom had been ridiculed 30 years ago for suggesting exactly what was now proven true. He'd seen the future when others saw only worthless desert. As Rachel and I walked to our car, the desert sunset painted everything in gold. Our facility stood as a testament to perseverance and vision, creating not just profits but a stronger community and family relationships I'd once thought permanently broken. Uncle Tom was right about the true value of this land. The rare earth elements beneath the surface had changed my life. But the journey itself had transformed me, from a comfortable corporate engineer to a desperate trailer dweller to a successful company founder. Each step had taught me something essential about what truly matters. In the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the minerals worth billions, but the wisdom to understand that real wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by what you build. Both in the physical world and in the relationships that give life its meaning.